Hi, my name is Debbie Gertler. I work for FamilySearch at the Family History Library. This class is called Genealogy in the Spanish Sea, the Caribbean. The focus of the class will be Puerto Rico. During this class, we will be discussing the history of Puerto Rico. We will also be talking about existing records that might be found on FamilySearch.org, and then we'll also mention some materials that might be found elsewhere, such as archives or libraries or other online sources that might help you with your Puerto Rican ancestors. Now, this is not designed to be the comprehensive all list for everything for Puerto Rico, but it's a good smattering of options and other places that you can look for more records. Let's take a look. So here's a map of Puerto Rico, and as you can tell, it wasn't done by a Spanish speaker because it says Puerto Rico, but it gives you a good feel for the country. This was taken from an older map. Let's talk about the history of Puerto Rico. Initially, the island was called Borinquen. It was first discovered in 1493, and the first official settlement was made in 1508. Between 1509 and 1526, it was under the Virreinato of Santo Domingo. And then following that, from 1526 to 1534, it was back under the Consejo de Indias. And then from 1534 to 1821, it was part of the Virreinato de Nueva España. Now, these are important to know because under these different jurisdictions, this will give you a place to look in the archive of the Indies and other archives to know where those records might be during that time period. And it continued under the Audiencia de Santo Domingo until 1527. After that, it became part of the Audiencia de Nueva España. And then there was the Spanish-American War in 1898. Following that, it became a territory of the United States, which it still is to this day, and there are 8 provinces. On FamilySearch, we have some really great records. We have the civil registration, and we have Catholic Church records. Civil registration is a more recent record collection of births, marriages, and deaths created by the government. And of course, Catholic Church records are the parish records of baptisms, marriages, and burials. And they tend to start much earlier, and they do cover a large part of the population since Puerto Rico was a Spanish colony and Spain is a very strong Catholic country. There are also records of foreign residents in Puerto Rico. So these would be all great places to look for more information about your Puerto Rican ancestors. Now, civil registration in Puerto Rico began in 1885. As the records are made, duplicate copies are sent to San Juan and are found in the Archivo General de Puerto Rico. And there's just a few examples of records that might be available in that chart. There are much more than those. Now let's talk about Catholic Church records. There are some record loss of some early parish registers. As we know, Puerto Rico is in Hurricane Alley and also very prone to earthquakes. So between the earthquakes and the storms, there are some record loss. So it's important to take that into consideration if you're not finding the records that you need. In some parishes, there are also padrones. So this would be in addition to the baptisms, the marriages, and the burials. A padron is like a census, and perhaps this padron was taken for tithing purposes or perhaps to determine who had received confirmation and who had not. One book that I would like to recommend to you to learn more about parish records and their availability is written by Mario Rodriguez Leon, and it's called Los Registros Parroquiales y la Microhistoria Demográfica en Puerto Rico, and it was published in 1990. In this book, you will find information about the record types that are available for each parish. He has gone through what appears to be every town in Puerto Rico or every archive where these records might be kept and identified what books are available, where there are gaps, and where they are located. I don't know if it's totally complete, but I highly recommend it. It's a wonderful resource for learning more about the church records and what's missing. Now, there are some census records. So 1801 to 1859, we have Censo y Riqueza. So undoubtedly, this one was probably taken for tax purposes as they're interested in riches. There are some other censuses taken in 1860, 1877, 87, and 97, but those appear to be missing. Their location is unknown. The 1872 census is in the Archivo General de los Puertorriqueños. In 1899, there was a census, and that can be found in NARA, the National Archives in Washington, D.C. Beginning in 1910, and every 10 years, Puerto Rico is part of the U.S. federal census because by that time they've become a territory of the U.S., so you can find them in the federal census. There is also a 1935 special federal census that was taken just for Puerto Rico that you can find on ancestry.com. Now, to find out more about these census records and census records for other areas of Latin America, I recommend Lyman Platt's book that's listed there on the slide. Now, if you're looking for compiled genealogies at the library, we have Genealogías Puertorriqueñas. These include families mostly from Mayaguez. It has indexes. It's kind of a family book format. It has the parent and the children and their spouses, and it also has the grandparents on both sides. I would also recommend that you check the genealogical societies for Puerto Rico because they gather much of this type of information and either publish it on their site or publish it in their publications. So it's important to check those out. Now, if you want to find them in the FamilySearch catalog, look under the subject heading Genealogy in Puerto Rico, in the name of the province or the county, and in the name of the city just to see what's available. And speaking of the societies that I mentioned earlier, here's a couple that you may want to check out. La Sociedad Puertorriqueña de Genealogía, and there is their web address, and it's also included in your syllabus material. They have some published indexes for parishes. They also have some census records. And then there's a Puerto Rican Hispanic Genealogical Society. Now let's go check out one of these society pages. So here is La Sociedad Puertorriqueña de Genealogía, and this is their webpage. And you notice here they have Recursos de Genealogía. So these are genealogical resources. They have a digital library. They have some information from their Biblioteca Central. Let's take a look at that. So this is their library. And then as you scroll down, you'll find out a little bit more information about when they're open and the records that they have available. So if you find something on this list that perhaps you would like to take a look at, you should probably reach out to the library and ask them if they will do a lookup for you. I'm sure they would be happy to help you. So now let's talk about immigration and immigration. There are some great passport records, 1795 to 1889. These are found on FamilySearch. There are also records of foreign residents, 1815 to 1845. There's Emigrados. This is a book. It's been digitized and it can be found on FamilySearch. And I also highly recommend the books by Estela Cifre de Lobriel. She has gone through and identified many immigrants into Puerto Rico and put them in book form. And I'm going to show you in a minute a few examples of those books. If you're talking about early immigrants during the colonial period, in order to come to New Spain, passengers needed a license or a permission from the court, from the royalty, from the king, in order to come. And those licenses can be found in the Casa de la Contratación. Other early passengers may be found on Pasajeros a Indias. We have those books at the library, although they're not complete. And these books cover particularly pre-1700 arrivals. Also, many passports that for these countries would have been issued in Spain. And then you may also find padrones de hidalguía. Now, in order to be a hidalgo, you needed to prove that you had done something that earned you the tax-exempt status of a hidalgo, or perhaps you'd done something to benefit the king or the kingdom, or you were of noble birth. And in order to prove that, you would have to present documents, perhaps genealogies, those types of information. So if you find your ancestor in a padrón de hidalguía, you're going to want to try to follow up and find where he was granted hidalgo status and read through those documents to see what it says about that and what genealogical information could be gleaned from those records. Now, this is one of those books by Estela Cifre de Lobriel. This is Immigration to Puerto Rico in the 19th century. And you can see she gives the names, and she gives a little bit of information about them, identifies in many cases their hometown, where they're from, and also she indicates in the notes, you'll want to check out the section on abbreviations, where she pulled this information from. So this is very well documented, and I highly recommend these books for those that are looking for immigrants that went to Puerto Rico. Here's another example of one of her books, and this one is foreigners living in Puerto Rico in the 19th century. And she actually divides these up by their home country, as you can see on the right. And then let's take a look at a page. So here we go. We have Ecuador, Egypt, Scotland, the United States. So she's gone through and divided them up. And again, she includes at the end of each citation the information regarding where she found this information. So you can go and look that information up yourself. These books are very well done, and I recommend that you try them if you're looking for an immigrant in Puerto Rico. So now let's talk a little bit about land records. They can be found in a variety of places, and they can be found under any one of a number of categories that are listed there on the screen. Tierras y aguas, capellanillas, which are chaplaincies, mayorazgos, which is kind of like a manor, a manorial record, vínculos, memorias, land memorials, obras pias, and encomiendas. So capellanillas would have been donations to the Catholic Church. Mayorazgos and vínculos are hereditary land registers. And then encomiendas would be the first land grants. And those are usually only found in the Spanish archives, because the first ones to give those land grants, of course, would have been in the Spanish government, the Spanish king or queen. Some other records you may find in the Registro de la Propiedad. These are modern land offices, the municipal archives. They usually begin about 1760, and they have land cells. They also have wills, and then they have property divisions. Again, each of these records may have information about your ancestor that will help you to learn more about their life, but also help you to extend your family tree. For military records, be sure and check out the Archivo General Militar en Segovia and the Archivo General de Simancas for those who were military officers or soldiers during Spanish colonial rule. There's the Hojas de Servicio de America, and those are found on microfilm at the Family History Library, and they're also indexed in this book, the Catálogo 22 del Archivo de Simancas. And if you find your ancestor in the catalog, then you're going to want to go and look at the service record on microfilm. And again, after 1900, any military records would be in the US government. So you will find Puerto Ricans in the World War I and World War II draft records. Notarial records, which could be land transactions, dowry inventories, marriage contracts, wills, testaments, those are going to be in the Archivo General de Protocolos in San Juan for certain areas. Those begin in 1790 and go through to the present. There are also military notaries for soldiers and military institutions. And then this Archivo General de Protocolos in San Juan includes San Juan, Cangrejos, Loiza, Rio Piedras, and Trujillo. There's also Archivo de Protocolos de Bayamón, and here you can see the different locations that are listed and the years that are available in that particular archive for those records. Now here's some more information about the archives in Puerto Rico and the records that you might find. First, we have the Guide to Puerto Rican Records in the National Archives, New York City, and they have a downloadable PDF document that talks about the record groups and the types of records that might be available in NARA for Puerto Rico. And then we also have the catalog for the Archivo General y Biblioteca Nacional de Puerto Rico. So that's the National General Archive and the National Library. Now let's take a look at that downloadable document from the National Archives in New York City. So here's that Guide to Puerto Rican Records in the National Archives of New York City. They have a lovely picture here. And then as you scroll down, you will see they begin to list the different record groups. And these page numbers indicate the page numbers where you can go to learn more about these record types. as we scroll down, I want to show you one. So this is the section on the census, and I mentioned that there's a 1935 census for Puerto Rico, and they have population schedules and agricultural schedules. And this gives you even some sample records that you can look at so you'll know what kind of information is available on those census. And it has these for all different record types. So if you're researching your ancestry in Puerto Rico, I recommend that you download a copy of this, save it to your computer so you can read up on what kind of records you might hope to find about your ancestors. So back to our presentation, let's talk about the Archivo General de Puerto Rico. They have testimonios de nobleza. Now, we talked a little bit about hidalgos who have that special tax exempt status. This also are similar documents proving a nobility. So these would be important to look at because they have genealogical proofs. They trace their ancestry to show that they are noble by birth. There are land records, 1716 and 1920, records of slaves. There's the archive of the Royal Court of Puerto Rico. There are notarial records and limpieza de sangre. Now, in order for someone to have a government job, they may have had to prove their pure blood, that they were faithful Catholics. Remember, Queen Isabella was not fond of those who had Jewish blood. And so a limpieza de sangre would be a record that would be created to prove that they were faithful Catholics for generations, and it would allow them to apply for these government jobs. And they have good genealogical information because they show their baptism records, they show their information about their parents and their grandparents, and perhaps their baptism records as well, their marriages in the church. So it's an important document to find if your ancestor is listed in one. There is also some civil registration records found at the archive, the General Archive. So now let's talk about the Archivo Digital Nacional de Puerto Rico. Their address is there on the screen, and it's also found in your syllabus. This is a private initiative by a group to gather and digitize information from both public and private archives and to put it online. So it includes collections from municipal archives, from historic newspapers, and from military and Navy archives, and a number of other archives as well. So I would recommend that you check them out as well. Good news! Records really do exist for Puerto Rico. You just need to know where to look. And I hope I've given you a bunch of new places to look. All of the links and the information is found in your syllabus material if you'd like to check that out. And now you have some other places to look for your Puerto Rican ancestors. Good luck. Thanks for hanging out with me.